recording. So there'll be a follow-up email when I post this probably to Vimeo, is where I will have this all available for later review on a Vimeo channel. Vimeo is like YouTube, but it just allows for longer postings. All right, so why don't we get started? If I may, I just want to say thank you very much for joining us. It's about the top of the hour. I want to respect everyone's time. This program will be focusing on threat assessments. Maybe you've joined me some earlier ones. I've been really trying to work all morning on including some new materials and some new concepts regarding, especially the new software program coming out, that I'm trying to develop a guide, and I just really did a lot of cutting and pasting from my guide into this presentation. And yes, I am recording this, and the information about the recording will be sent out later. I may have to send it out much later because I got to do the conversion of the file. Okay, a little bit, roughly I assume about 3/4 of an hour. I really welcome any sort of communication. Please note in your program or in your UI cancel, the user interface panel, there's a way to expand out, and then there's a questions tab. So you are welcome to ask questions, and I'll try to keep an eye out on those questions. And in fact, I'm popping it out here now so I could keep an eye on it. So interrupt me. It would be much more interesting if we have a dialogue as opposed to me just reading slides. Although I do want to say I got quite a bit of material to go over. Moving on. Okay, a little bit myself. This is being brought to you by the ePanic button. I'll do a quick little demo at the end. But more importantly, some of my experience comes from leading Peace at Work, which is an agency dedicated to violence prevention in and through the workplace. Here's some of my experience listed here. There's my contact info. As always, I'm fairly active in LinkedIn with all the security and workplace violence related groups, and I welcome any further discussion. If there's a dispute or disagreement, or we want to expand on certain concepts that are introduced here, I encourage continuing that conversation. We can call me, we can email around, but if we could share this dialogue with others, then we'll all be more richly informed, and the industry can grow from there. There's a little disclaimer. I just want to put it out that there certainly are some other avenues out there and ways to develop your skills. This is, hopefully you can learn a few tips. Maybe this is just an overview. Again, I call it basics, and also we could also learn from each other as well. But of course, I encourage you to continue your own education. Broadly, here's just some guiding principles. I just want to talk about threat assessments in general, just to look at the bigger picture. In my opinion, it's far from a science. We could certainly argue about efficacy, meaning evidence-based approaches. I was lucky enough to be with the Injury Prevention Research Center in Chapel Hill, which is a public health institute, and they were very stringent on making sure that all your statements had some backing to it. We can look at specific, and I'm not going to make any recommendations about threat assessment tools that are out there, and then there's questions about the studies that were done on those, on their efficacy. But whatever system, I am personally not aware of any conclusive studies on any specific approach that demonstrates any real evidence. If anyone on the call is aware of any, shoot it in the chat. I'll look it up, I'll Google it, and we can sure share that now. The other point, some people also talk, it's a thing between art and science, so there's a level of like subjective gut reaction sort of experience that certainly plays a part. The one thing that I want to make sure is that no one, I don't really believe in ever spitting out any percentage rank, like there's a 70% chance the guy will shoot you. I'm not too sure how you would arrive at such a number. Also, please understand, as I say here, that you could certainly have a case where you feel fairly certain there could be pending danger, nothing happens, and vice versa, that you could do a assessment, gather all the information that's available to you, and you could judge that it's a low-level concern, and it could actually result in a homicide. those factors. The other very important factor that I want to make about or comment about threat assessments is that it's a fluid process in that it's not a linear, let's gather information, let's digest the information, and let's take action steps. Kind of like you're building a tree house or starting a new business. You don't follow a linear plan, but the nature of these incidents are really dynamic. New issues can come into play, divorce, health diagnosis, even something as crazy as news coming on the channel about a drought coming in. That could have influence over a person's decisions. So the one thing I want to mention as I go through these steps, please understand, I don't mean steps as in like making a recipe, you follow A through Z, but rather these are things that you could do that you might give more attention to one factor, to another step, to another issue, but you have to always keep this bird's eye view of the whole picture to know where you need to be placing your attention. Again, I encourage anyone, all of you, to ask questions, interrupt, whatever is most beneficial for this presentation. Another element that I want to demonstrate or cover regarding threat assessment is that there's usually this attention to the subject, meaning, okay, is this guy dangerous? Like people think of, oh, you do threat assessment, so you tell if people are crazy or evil. No. Broadly, we can look at threat assessment looking at three factors, and this is some of my knowledge from or from my experience of attending other workshops, reading books, and going through other trainings. One factor, of course, you're talking about the person, like you're studying an individual to see, well, how dangerous they may be or how serious their threat is. Another point, though, is you want to look at their target, and I'll talk about this a little bit later. The third factor is the environment, and by environment, I'm talking about the physical security issues, like barriers, locked doors, cameras, things like sort of SEPTED kind of elements. That's crime prevention through environmental design. But environment could also include the sort of holistic atmosphere or culture. So we could talk about the attitudes of the workforce, the level of hostility, how toxic the workplace or environment may be, and those also contribute to the risk. I've heard someone say that the question is not, will he come back and shoot their boss? The question is, will a shooting occur? And that includes larger issues around the boss's behavior and the workplace in general. Again, like when we talk about the environment, we have no doubt that there's threats against let's say political figures, but so that's why many of those security professionals really address the environment and how they can serve that, because they're pretty certain that the danger is present. So just please be aware of the gestalt, if I could use that word, of the threat assessment process. Now I'm going to go over briefly, if I may, just like larger pictures about how you should be doing this. Again, I'm talking about basics, so I apologize to anyone who's already developed a team or experienced in these issues. But broadly, what we want to do is, of course, come up with a team, and I'll talk about the value of a team approach, and then certainly be looking at those procedures or policies which have very strong legal implications. So your legal counsel is really required to be part of this process. And then with that, even though you've got your team, you want to think about the larger team that may include some third-party outside resources and what resources are available for that team for further training or for, let's say, security. And then part of that, of course, is always the training and practice issues, which are vital, because it really doesn't. I'm trying to remember if I've got this covered in a slide or not. While we could develop the skills of the threat assessment team, at the same time, we're also trying to develop the teamwork, the cohesion, and the dynamics of that team to effectively, quickly assess a threat and implement security. Now, let's make an assumption here that you've got a larger organization, 1,000+ employees, multiple regional offices, and therefore you got all these title heads that you could see listed on the left here. I'm not suggesting that these are everyone in this these categories should be on the team. It's just certainly a suggestion. Naturally, one thing that's very important, as I mentioned, is legal counsel is very vital, and then obviously security would be a natural part of this, human resources as well. The one thing is, even though we're talking about department heads, what we're looking for is individuals who have some level of authority. I could call it checkbook authority. They could go and make a call and make something happen without going through red tape of doing some sort of budget allocation request. In addition, they also may have some authority regarding information. I'll talk about that later, but like for instance, human resources or occupational health having privileged information about individuals, confidential information. Another factor, though, is the frontline folks. You might have a veteran employee that just really knows the organization. They're not a supervisor level of management, but they're in experience, or maybe their maturity, or maybe just their whoever they are, lends them to be valuable members. The most important person of this team that I suggest is some sort of coordinator. That I do suggest that there's a point person. Now, I'm not saying necessarily a leader who ultimately makes the final decisions. I think it depends on the nature of your group, how that will be done. But I mean, who collects the records? Who's the central focus person? You know how this goes. If anyone's done any sort of project management, you need someone who's sort of like the point person, and that's what I'm talking about. Now, naturally, one of the points about these team members is this: we're talking about emergency situations, so we do need to be able to access them at any time. Considering, where are we? We're in late July. Everyone I know is on vacation now, so you have to take those considerations as well. How to reach them at any time. Now, while I talked about the professional roles of these individuals, the other issue I want to mention is sort of like the it's their personality perceptions, like maybe their upbringing, their backgrounds, and then also their position may lend them to concentrate on certain issues and have a certain perspective of things. What I'm talking about is, I'm just going to pretend, looking at this picture, we got a security guy that's, let's say, ex-military or ex-law enforcement, and their training, their experience will lend towards a certain perception of factors or opinions towards what security, what action steps should be taken. We'll have a legal person that's going to have their perspective. I'm going to talk about that quite a bit more later. And then maybe we've got an HR director that's really looking at confidentiality issues, about consistency issues with other treatments of other employees. So the point is, you need diversity in these perspectives, but the diversity can never be lending to conflict, where there's just this quagmire of people just not arguing for their own issues. That's why certainly good teamwork is important, and then of course leadership. But when it comes to the tire hitting the road, many of these incidents require really quick decisions, and it's a good idea to have an organization that can quickly make these decisions given the emerging issues. Now, I may be beating a dead horse on this, but I really want to emphasize an issue that comes up with these different varying team members is that there'll be different objectives for the investigation. And particularly with employee-related issues, or let's say student-related issues, there's a couple of discussions going on. Let's say an employee, throws a shovel and says, "I'm going to shoot you," and then points their finger at someone and moves their thumb like they're firing it, and then storms off. Okay, with that issue, certainly why we're here today is talk about threat assessment. Is he going to come back and shoot someone? How can we prevent that? However, there's another conversation about their behavior, whether it warranted any disciplinary action. up to including dismissal. Please understand that both of these are two separate questions going on, and then they certainly do influence the other. If you engage in these disciplinary acts, that it could have it will have an impact on the threat perception. By the way, just a quick little caveat, going off on a tangent. Some people are concerned about making the subject angry. Like if you engage in some disciplinary action, writing them up, some sort of demotion or something like that, that it could set them off. While on a case-by-case situation, you got to look at all the different factors. One thing that's really important is setting clear boundaries, especially early on. And one thing that's been found in many cases is that there was a long history of inappropriate behavior that was not addressed with appropriately. And so just one possible argument is that disciplinary actions are important for setting clear boundaries, sort of that carrot approach when we talk about the stick and carrot, to make sure that they know their place. Sorry, going off on another tangent. I've been recently reading some really interesting articles about domestic abusers regarding lethality assessment teams. I might be using the wrong term there, but especially when we're looking at domestic violence, one thing that they found was that when abusers were quickly and effectively, I don't want to use the term punish, but when there was definite court judicial actions, when the guy was put in jail, a GPS tracking monitor bracelet on their ankle, every time they were violated, it was instantly, they're in jail, they're behind bars, that they found that had a lower, that in those cases that there was lower chance of homicide. So, I'm just trying to illustrate the importance of these boundary setting measures. Now, getting back on topic, looking at this slide, there's a third objective that's going on. That's going to be the concentration of your legal counsel and probably your HR folks. And that's going to be talking about the legal defense. Everything they're doing is they're trying to imagine one day this may be in court. And so they're trying to determine what is the most defensible stance they could take, the least aggravating, or trying to reduce the aggravating factors for any potential lawsuit or EEOC claim or things like that, or even an OSHA claim. And so please understand, what I'm trying to emphasize here is these are different objectives, and we have to recognize it as such, and just that's the main thing, recognize it, because they may be that all of the decisions made are in cohesion, but they could be in conflict. Let me give you a great example. Legal defense, what I've seen sometimes in some of the cases I've reviewed was that legal wanted to do things very officially, if that's a word, like, when you get those certified letters in the mail and you have to sign saying, yes, I did receive this letter, and they don't want any communications between the manager and the employee. So I'm giving you an example of an employee sent on administrative leave, sent home, don't call us, we'll call you. They don't want the managers dropping by or making a phone call and just checking in on the individual. Any communication will go through legal, and legal's going to use some courier service that proves that the person signed the paper. Do you understand, like, sort of that very official kind of approach? In many ways, while I'm not an attorney, and maybe there's value in that for whatever reasons, another perspective can be that it could be a very insulting and aggravating stance for those individuals. They may feel really cut off and treated like a criminal and held off, and then that could be an aggravating issue in terms of the threat assessment, the insult. So that's just giving an example of sort of these different viewpoints and objectives in conflict. Okay, once you got the team, then part of all those things I discussed is come up with some policies and procedures around this. What are the roles of the individuals? I talked about the importance of the coordinator. One very big, did I spell especially right? Important issue is the confidentiality of material, and I'll cover that in a little bit. The documentation and storage of information, and then one point I want to say about here is and this is what I do when I look at workplace violence policies, is make sure that you're not stating any sort of measure that you're not actually going to follow through with. A great example is we're going to do annual threat assessment trainings and drills, and tabletop exercises, or members will receive professional training like going to some webinar. Well, if that's not actually done, then that's certainly creating liability and demonstrating negligence for the organization. Also then, let's establish some resources. What's available not only for the investigation to help you dig up information or how to support victims or the perpetrators, but also for further trainings for the team members. One thing is when you, so what I'm talking about is sort of well, who is that Rolodex anymore, right? But sort of that idea of a contact list of organizations. One thing I strongly, of course, encourage is a working relationship with them, like first name basis. Law enforcement's a given. That's a real good idea to have a good relationship with their law enforcement. But it's not like, oh, do I call 911? No, but you know the sergeant who runs the community policing program for your neighborhood, for the neighborhood where your business lives in. You know, it's that sort of thing. I'm not saying a first name basis, you can keep it professional, but know them. They know you, you know them. I feel the same way about, as I talk a lot about domestic violence as a huge issue. Get to know your domestic violence shelter that's in your organization. Of course, maybe you have an in-house employee assistance program. The two that you may not be aware of so much is there's one organization called ASIS, which is sort of the main security association. I guarantee you've got a local chapter near you, especially if you're in a larger city. Another organization that I'm a member of is the Association of Threat Assessment Professionals, and you may be able to find these, you know, I won't say accredited, but the experienced folks that can help you when you get into it. Hey, one little note I want to make here. I don't know who's on the call. I don't know about your level of experience or the resources you have available, but at a certain point, your threat assessment, all that you're doing is doing some initial triage and then bringing in professionals. I'm not doing a pitch here. I'm not trying to say you should call me when it gets serious, but it may be that all you're doing is saying, hey, this is looking serious. Let's bring in some people who do this day in and day out, and getting their support. So having a relationship with these organizations is pretty important. Of my colleagues who do this, I mean, they've got a first name basis with their contacts, and maybe they're on some sort of retainer with them, maybe they're not, but the HR director certainly could quickly pull up their contact and say, hey, Fred, hey, Gene, we got a situation. Do you got time to talk this afternoon? Looking at the overview of the steps, I just want to do this real quickly about the process of the threat assessment. I'm not talking about, you know, reporting or warning signs or red flags that, you know, employees come to you. It may be that you witnessed the incident, or maybe someone calls you about it. I don't know who's on the call, but for larger organizations, it may be very well that you're the third person down the line to hear about this. So you may have some sort of formal report process. That's another topic. One thing you're always doing is sort of this basic continual triage. Is this 911? Is this actual, it's happening now or very soon, at which point you want to certainly get emergency response. Now, if it's not quite that, but where, you know, the guy's or woman's coming with a gun, two quick things to consider: having off-duty officers placed. If you don't have in-house security, off-duty officers available. The other factor is if it's an employee or a student, you can certainly look at some sort of administrative leave. Also, as I mentioned, you're maybe the third person to hear about it. Go find out the actual incident. Maybe you're reading the report, which is certainly valuable, but I would personally want to go and talk to the person who saw the thing. And this is really important because we're talking about the details, the verbatim, the actual words used in any threats is important. The other point I want to mention is the importance of interviewing people separately. Then if there's, you know, damage to property, notes, anything that's considered evidence, naturally you want to preserve that. Now, as I mentioned before about the dynamic level nature of threat assessments, I'm pointing out, like I'm going through slides, here's this slide, there's that slide, the next slide, and by no means am I trying to suggest any order to this. The whole point is, again, these are steps that can be taken, but focusing on what's most important. What we want to do is gather data, and this could be done, gathering personnel information or student records. Maybe you have safety records. If it's a client, you might have information about them. This is a huge issue, especially when we talk about healthcare. Let's say you've got a mental health facility, or you run some sort of residential halfway homes for folks. These records certainly would be very, very important, and later I'll talk again about HIPAA regulations. There's good old background checks. Now, with employees, I know maybe you did a background check with them when they first started working, 40 years ago or 4 years ago. A lot could happen between now and then, so go ahead and get another one and pull local records for where that individual lives and travels, so you can find out what's going on. And by the house, that also includes, by the way, that includes police reports, which are not going to be found in your standard criminal background checks. This again goes back to the whole point about resources. Have a good background check company, what's it called, a consumer reporting agency that you've got a relationship with, so they can get the info to you quickly and right. There's civil records. One thing I want to mention, people think about restraining orders as sort of a criminal act, but that will not be found in the in criminal background checks unless it was violated, and that's a crime. And then, as you know, I do a lot of work around social media and finding out what could be in there. These are, again, just overview steps. The other thing we want to do are interviews. So I mentioned about talking to the targets, whoever initially made that report. Now, if it's applicable, you could also interview the subject. But when you do that, certainly you want to think about safety in mind. Again, we want to allow the person to tell their side of the story. This is not, a grilling of them. It's not an interrogation, but finding out their side of the story. And then when I'm talking about safety, maybe it's going to be off-site. Maybe it's going to be in a place off hours. I'm not a fan of the whole treating them like prisoners and having big guys march them in and march them out. But it may be wise to have security present but not seen. Excuse me. There's also what we can call collateral witnesses, like people who are involved or know the individual when we're gathering info about the subject, about their sporting habits or status going on with their lives. You may want to know what's going on there. And then real quickly, I'm just putting this as the overview. I won't have time to get into it today, but naturally you want to be thinking about security measures along the way. And as you gather information, you're always doing this overview review and saying at what level do you have there's different levels of response. So, for instance, having an off-duty officer or putting up barriers around or going into some sort of semi-soft lockdown procedures, all things like that. One important thing that I often say is have an immediate response plan always ready. Sort of a template that you can adjust for emerging issues, meaning the guy shows up, now what? And, of course, the heart of that is calling 911 as soon as possible. The other thing, though, is target hardening or making the workplace or the areas more safe, whether that means barriers, cameras, whatever it might be, dogs. And then the targets themselves could be, we have to give attention to targets, and this is particular around like domestic violence victims or executives, or if we happen to know that someone they got a beef with, like a personal dispute between coworkers. Now, I just want to throw in here that some people have this perspective of I'm a security director for Acme Corporation, and my job is to secure Acme headquarters. I just want to put out there, it's important to look at the larger picture of targets, including their home or their children's schools, things like that. Yes, maybe the assault may occur off grounds, off the clock, and then you feel not responsible. I hope you don't feel that way. I hope you don't. Okay, and then the other side of this, even though we talked about the stick in the sense of the carrot and stick approach, the other side is support. And what I mean here is I'm talking about for the subject, the individuals. There's one Theory, I've heard a lot of different ways of expressing this, but they talk about sort of desperate aggressors and expert aggressors. A desperate person who's really at the end of the rope, who really does not really mean to intend to inflict harm, but they just feel really backed into a corner. What could you do to get them out of that corner? Employee assistance, mental health issues, substance abuse issues, financial problems. These are all things that if we can help alleviate their situation, we could maybe make them think of another alternative besides violence. And then naturally, of course, the targets need support as well. Not even the fact that, I'm not talking about after they've been shot or wounded. I mean, their fear. You need to address their fear. Sometimes I've done threat assessments where we've really determined that the threat is not that strong, but the individual was still very, very concerned. You still have to take that as being real, and whether that's going to be employee assistance programs or even measures just to, I would say just, but with the point of trying to help the person feel safer, that has value because we're trying to make sure that they could concentrate on doing their job. Okay, getting into a little bit more, what we want to do then is we're looking at these risk factors. I'm going to talk about different factors, in particular, like trying to wrap it around this new tool that I've been working on, and we have to think about how we get that information, how we're getting it. This is kind of repeating what I was going over before, but certainly we want to look at these points. Be aware that certain information there's legal concerns, so seek your own legal counsel around financial records and health-related records. I recently did a post in LinkedIn about this real question about what do you do with information you happen to come across, you discover that's very important about their health. For instance, that they're on certain antidepressant medications, and maybe you want to know about whether they are taking them or not. That could be certainly, I believe, I'm not an attorney, but that could be considered personal health information, and the way that information is being handled is pretty important. Finally, there's always good old professionals getting folks to gather that info for you. I talked about interviews before. I just do a little more detail here that you can read on how you do those issues. By the way, it may not be necessarily you, in a sense, doing the interviewing. You could work with employee assistance professionals, law enforcement, or even in a sense like a forensic psychologist who's certainly trained in talking with people and getting information about them. Let me break this down then into the factors, the findings, the discoveries, and I'm going to kind of couch this in my little categorization. And it doesn't matter so much. I'm just trying to put things, pigeonhole things just in order to have some organization. I don't think that there's certainly no harm in coming up with your own system or have your own categories. These are just ways that I try to wrap things around. One important thing is the threat itself. So meaning a threat could be, when I mean directly, like I'm going to shoot you, like that's a threat. But I also mean about that threatening behavior, the push, the shove, the drawing a explicit, horrifying picture of someone, being shot, that sort of thing could, I'm applying the word threat very broadly. While direct threats are, I'm going to argue, maybe somewhat rare. There's one guy, I think, Dr. Steve Albert out in California. He sometimes talks about barkers and biters. I don't know if he came up with that, but I've heard him mention it. About that people can certainly say, hey, I'm going to kick your butt, and they never follow through. I think we all know with folks like that. And there could be individuals who don't make those overt threats, but they are the real danger. One thing, though, I believe is they may provide some vague or veiled sort of threats that we need to consider. When we talk about employees reporting, I strongly emphasize that if they ever feel threatened, like how do you know it's a threat? If you feel threatened, that's a threat, and then that's what initiates the report. For you all at your level of doing the threat assessment, it really comes down to looking at the specifics of those of that threat. When I talk about specifics, I'm really talking about the details. One thing that certainly lends credence to the potential danger is what does it demonstrate for their forethought? I took this slide out, but there's one interesting case of I think she was an attorney. I'm sorry, I'm not sure what, but she was going after an ADA, that there was this animosity towards a prosecutor, and the person stated that she had she was going to get a vial of insulin, and when they were alone together in the elevator, she was going to shove a hypodermic needle into her arm and shove 20 cc's of insulin in the person. The fact that you have a location, a method, and a manner of it certainly led to that threat being much more credible. Another factor is time dependencies, about a sense of urgency, certainly any dates or times, or if there's references within the language about, well, urgency, immediacy. That certainly is an important factor. One final thing I want to mention about threats is there's this funny word called leakage. I'm waiting for the industry to find a different word, but I think that's the one that's going to stick. And this is regarding people talking about their intentions to commit violence. And this is when coworkers, colleagues, whoever come forward and say, hey, Johnny said something really bizarre the other day. He's really got or he's really angry at you, and I think he talked about how he wants to hurt you. It's that sort of leakage that they talk about what they're going to do that may have some credence as well. People, again, run their mouths a lot, but we have to consider that. The other thing is if it's not direct, like you don't hear from a person, but in today's day and age, people communicate to the whole world through social media or different postings, avenues, Instagram, stuff like that. The other factor I want to look at is that incidents of violence, usually there's a strong sense of justice around them. I'm working on my book about that, and there's a problem. They feel like that there's something that where they've been wronged, and whether they choose to use violence might be because this is their final option, or they feel like they need to commit some retribution for the wrong they were given. So certainly, if they were fired, they didn't get a promotion, the services were not met, or for services were being forced upon them that they don't want. And then, of course, with intimate partner relationships, we can sure talk about the grievance really is a sense of the ending of the relationship is the problem. So that's certainly what my point is. While like, for example, in domestic relationships, certainly there are cases of a husband killing a wife while she's staying with him. It's a much, much bigger picture, worse picture, when the wife, the abused victim, leaves, because then the grievance is, hey, you were never supposed to leave me, and that escalates the risk gravely. Someone who's applying for a job doesn't get the job, and then they're mad, they might commit violence, but if they get the job, they're not going to. I think I made that obvious. The other point that I want to put out here is, and this is something that I'm really struggling with, is the sense of true random rampage sort of stuff when the grievance is against larger society. Sometimes you see this with school shootings that, kids may feel that society's done this to me, and it's really hard to determine, it's not just that they broke up someone or someone broke up with them or they lost their job, but they just have this hostility. This is sometimes against certain races, certain religions, against society in general. And so that's a real problem. And the real problem with this is then the target is rarely warned. For instance, there's a lot of hostility towards government these days. So while the small city council issue, there's an argument over a sign ordinance or something like that, that'll be really obvious. But against the federal government, is that going to be against the Pentagon? Like, you're thinking about who was that guy? He brought a rifle towards the Pentagon, was shot towards the parking lot. That was a few years ago. That would be a bad decision to make. However, it could be pointed towards census workers, like a census worker is coming around doing the census and someone takes pot shots at them. Again, that's really hard to predict. I guess you read my points there. The other factor that I want to look at is broadly the status. While we talked about the grievance issues, like that's the heart of the problem that's going on, we also want to look largely at their overall situation. Is it getting better? Is it getting worse? People who got accepted to an Ivy League school, have a new, great, super cool, wonderful, new, intimate relationship, just got a funky, snazzy new sports car. Things are going well for them. They're not going to ruin it all by committing an act of violence that puts them in jail or committing suicide. A large number of these incidents result in suicide. Roughly, I'm going to throw out the number around 33%. And so with that, you could see that there's a real sense of despair with these individuals. And so suicide ideation, of course, is another risk factor. So how desperate are they is my point. Now with that, I don't know, like how do you judge someone's desperate or someone's, feeling like they are at a loss? What we can quantify or objectively obtain is, what's going on in their lives. They just, dropped out of school. They just lost a court case. They just got a speeding ticket, whatever it might be. I'm throwing in health issues, but I've got it in other places as well. Financial issues are very, very relevant as well. Now, broadly, when I part of the status is also the health. In fact, I even have this as a separate category because certainly we can talk about mental health diagnosis, substance abuse. There's a number of cases that it was reported that the individual was recently, diagnosed with some debilitating, third stage prostate cancer, something like that, which really lends to their sense of desperation. Some of this, again, you can find out through whatever avenues you can, but I know there's value also in looking at their general appearance. We find that individuals may reduce their attention to hygiene, showering, shaving, stuff like that. Conversely, especially right before the incident or during the incident, there might be some big transformation. There's a few interesting cases of individuals like shaving their heads. Think of Robert De Niro in Taxi Cab Driver. Part of that was to change his looks and giving himself the mohawk. But like this, I think that there's sort of a tribal kind of a primitive sort of putting on the war paint sort of issues that you have to consider when you're doing these sort of they're getting ready to commit this final act. So I think I'm making my point there. Now, one final thing regarding health issues is, again, going back to the HIPAA. I'm not by no means, I'm not an expert in this area, but I know enough that you've got to seriously think about what you're doing with this information, how you obtained it, how you store it, and what you do with it. So you just have to consider those points. Naturally, this is a very important issue, and we're talking about the history of violence. If I can give a quick phrase, the best indicator of future behavior is their past behavior. Golly, I'm not saying, and by the way, I'm also trying to say that people can change their story, and there's issues around criminal background checks and the ability for people to move on with their lives. But certainly people who've committed acts of violence before, there's a good indication that those individuals will do it again. With that, the other point that I want to put out here is also we want to look at a change or an escalation in their response to the violence, how they handle it. So, okay, you got a guy that mouths off a lot, throws chairs, curses, kicks things, punches walls, and that's their nature. Now, that has to be addressed, no doubt. I mean, that's an issue. But if they continue on that way, what we see is that it's a baseline. Like that's who they are, their behavior. If it's escalating, they're presenting a weapon, they're more virulent in their attacks, certainly that's a concern. But more importantly, I'd be looking at the guy who didn't have this sort of personality before, and now they're introducing sort of violent tendencies. That's what we're trying to determine. Another point, and I don't know, golly, I almost wanted that as a separate factor, and by no means am I not suggesting anything about gun ownership in itself. I know that's a real hot topic, and I'm trying to stay out of it, actually. But when someone is presenting a threat, one of my first questions is their knowledge and access and to weapons, firearms. And what we could do there certainly is finding out about concealed weapons permit, and I think it really varies. I don't know the answer if how much of that is available as public record or not. there was that ridiculous thing that I'm throwing a political statement, but the where was it, Connecticut, where they published the records, they published a map of all the residents of people who had a concealed weapons permit. So I'm just trying to point out the access of the availability of this information. Again, it's not in itself, possession of a firearm is not in itself a danger, but in the larger picture in combination with the threat of shooting someone and all these other factors. Also, we have to look at the type and range and quantity of weapons as well. Okay. Finally, the other part I want to mention about violent history is if they've been a victim of crime. Oh my goodness, I got 10 minutes left. We got to look at if they've been a victim of crime as well, because people who, I'm not knocking victims, but people who have unresolved issues around being victims of violence may harbor a real sense of embitterment. A great case is Joseph Ferguson, who was molested by his mother and went on to do a rampage in Sacramento back in 2001. Okay. Other things we want to look at is relationships as well, meaning what is the deterioration kind of relates to their status, but also we need to know if they've got some sort of backup, that these are pretty desperate acts, and those who have a support network are less likely to, in a sense, quote unquote, fall off the edge. Another fact, this is all just, now I'm getting a little random with different points, but especially regarding students and employees, and heck, I'd go with even spouses. Like, if there's a real sense of identification of who they are with that role, the loss of that role, divorce, firing, expulsion, could lead to the sense of they're losing who they are, therefore what do they got to lose? So those are important factors. One thing when we talked about criminal history and such, I know we got this picture of some sort of gangbanger kind of person, but I always go back to a great movie. I got to go and buy this movie, Michael Douglas in Falling Down, where he is a pretty straight-laced individual, very rigid in their values. This kind of falls through with some I look at post-traumatic embitterment disorder. Someone who feels like their values are being insulted, those need to fix their rights. Make things right is a factor. The other mention I want to say is we talked a lot about the subject. Let's also look at the target as well. And with that, let's look at some specifics. One is that the target, when you're doing the assessment, the fact that the target who knows the most about the individual may be holding back information. It's not a question of whether the shooting will occur, but it's a question of the quality of your assessment. I'm not knocking you and your ability. What I'm saying is the quality of your info may be hampered given the information and the way that information is given to you. So that certainly is a factor. Another factor is that the target could be antagonizing the person. This isn't blaming. What I'm talking about is bullying situations where an individual will could probably make it. The PowerPoint, someone had a question if that PowerPoint's available. Yeah, I got to still finalize it. Maybe I will provide it. I'm really trying to get this out of my guide, and then when I have the guide finished, I'd like to provide it to folks. But certainly the recording is going to be available afterwards. I just got to convert it and upload it. So yes, you will have access to this later. I understand people are looking at their clock and saying, we got to move forward. The other factor we want to look at is cavalier disregard. That's a funny. You can tell I'm an English major, right? What I mean is, you put in security measures. The point is, the individuals may not follow through with those security measures because they don't think it's necessary for whatever reasons. We're talking about, is a shooting going to occur? Not if the guy's going to do the shooting, and you may be positive he's going to do the shooting. The biggest risk factor is the target is antagonizing them and or doesn't care about about the security measures you're putting into place. The third part, and this is really more in regards to intimate partner relationships, where you're going to find that the target could very easily, I don't want to see flip-flop, it's difficult. They may very well go back and be working with the individual. The security measures you put into place will be violated by the target. If there's any DV victims out there, we could talk later, or, I'm sorry I don't have time to get into a discussion with you, but many of you do recognize this dynamic. and it's quite complicated. And by no means is it not victim blaming. I'm just objectively looking at the situations. Finally, let's get entirely unscientific and say that you do have to listen to your gut about these things. I throw in a lot of factors. Later on, I'll show you the tool that I'm developing. I actually haven't developed. I just need to put it on my development site. Look at the big picture, and what do you think? I could tell some stories here, but in the interest of time, I just want to emphasize that your unscientific, intuitive kind of impression does have value. With that, I want to mention just a few red flags. By that, I'm not talking about red flags to report. I'm not talking about employees coming forward with concerns about warning signs. I'm saying as you do your investigations, here's just some thoughts. I'm not saying these are automatic rank 10 kind of level issues, but I'm just trying to demonstrate something you need to be aware of. Number one, and I think this is most important, is if in your assessment and as you're going through this chronology, is if there's an increase in the severity and the frequency of these incidents, that could certainly be a good indicator for homicide. I got this from looking at domestic violence lethality assessments, and they found that there is evidence here demonstrated where the person's doing worse things, let's say going from a push to a slap to a kick to showing a knife to throwing a spear to pulling out a gun to grabbing a machine gun to driving a tank. I'm being facetious here, but I'm trying to demonstrate, the escalation. And then also, the first incident was 3 months ago, and then the next one was like a month later, and then it was 2 weeks later, and then it was 1 week later, and then it was every day, and then multiple times a day. These, there has been evidence showing that that is a very high indicator of homicide. When you backtrack on these cases, that was a big indicator. The other factor is we may see the individual sorry, I made a little mistake. In fact, I'm going to correct it right now. The factor is looking at scoping out the location. So you'll see them, especially if they don't belong there. This is a ex-partner or a client or a stranger who's coming around. They do scope out. They plan. Many of these incidents are well planned, almost obsessively planned. So when you see them frequently taking pictures, looking at this is a lot of Secret Service, government security folks really are concentrating on this sort of reconnaissance as a pre-indicator for violence. So one case, George Sedini out in Pennsylvania, who went into what's that called, that Latin aerobics class thing. Anyways, he goes to aerobics class, Zumba or something like that. Goes there and he's walking through, talking about, this is the room I'll go through, here's how I'll turn out the lights, and he's talking about in his blog about how he's planned this and did the practices as well. The other factor is, I mentioned that justice is a huge issue, and people try to seek justice through traditional means, workers' comp, EEOC, taking someone to court, and when that is not met, even on a client level, like when you go to this Attorney General Consumer Complaints Department, they tried to do this, and when it's not met, they basically, and if I could just put it, they take justice into their own hands. So we want to look at that. In particular, be very wary of, Zumba, thank you. Yes, you got that. I appreciate that. The domestic violence cases is you have to be very careful around restraining order hearings, divorce hearings, custody hearings, and and here's the deal. Okay, with workplace stuff, like if they win the workers' comp or they win the EEOC hearing, then they're somewhere to leave. They feel justified. Domestic violence, it doesn't matter if they lose or not. It's the fact that the victim went so as far as to finally go through with that restraining order. So let's say they even restraining orders taken against them and they win. It doesn't matter. The main point is that person tried to get a restraining order against them. And by the way, okay, I'm going off on a tangent. Regarding non-familiar stalking cases where we've got someone who doesn't know the individual. This is big in celebrity-related issues or like political figures or like a newscaster, if there's no relationship between the person, the restraining order can sometimes be an exasperating issue because it establishes a relationship, it legalizes the relationship, even if it's contrary, between the stalker and the victim. I don't think it's so much a factor regarding like intimate partners where, an ex-wife is trying to get one. But just be aware of that. If you got a stranger stalking someone, the restraining orders could be an aggravating factor. Again, I'm not saying that flat out. Just be aware there's been some thoughts and some research on that. Read Gavin DeBecker's Gift of Fear for a great story on it. Golly, hey, I think I'm going to make it on time. So, what else could there possibly be out there? The main thing I want to point you towards is when you do an assessment, this is very important, please be aware of what you're doing is you're creating liability for yourself. You're proving foreknowledge. So, again, I'm not an attorney. Talk to your attorney. But whatever you document, maybe write it in the sand, put it on a whiteboard so you can wipe it off. Anything except for the White House, like if it's an email, nothing's ever deleted. Please be aware that you got to be aware that anything you're documenting, it could be brought to court. So the big issue is if you document something and you say this is a possible step, document why you did not take this step. We did not hire off-duty officers because we did not get a restraining order because, that's going to give a better, you can have some sort of defense then. Again, I'm not an attorney. I'm working on my resources list, and here's a partial one. A lot of it really came out of the school shootings, and that's where a lot of the great work, and I know people may make some inappropriate jokes here, but Virginia Tech has a great threat assessment guidelines that are posted on their website. Again, the school stuff is where a lot of this all came through, and there's some different points. I'm not making any recommendations here, but the two big ones that I'm aware of are Mosaic programs, again, from Gavin DeBecker, and then the Center for Aggression Management with John Burns. He has his tool, the Aggression Management tool, which, certainly, so you can check those out. And then I mentioned before, get some professional support from these two main organizations out there. Golly, thank you. I see most of you all stuck with it to the end. I appreciate that. I hope that this was valuable. I'm working on this, actually all morning. I just did a lot of cutting and pasting before this, but I'm continuing to work on it for the rest of the month. Yeah, more webinars coming up. Oh, the big one. Okay, don't go anywhere. Don't go anywhere, because I want to introduce you to someone I'm really excited about. Lynn, I got to move this. On August 6th, I know you probably get my my emails, right? But on August 6th, Lynn Fairweather is going to be doing something on threat assessment, especially around the domestic violence stuff. I went to a training with her in Baltimore, and it was awesome. I learned a lot. I'm really looking forward to this program. August 6th, it's free. I think it's the same time frame, same bat channel, same bat time, 2 o'clock. But join us for that, because if you're tired of listening to me, she's you can learn a lot from her. What's the next thing? Oh, this was all brought to you by the ePanic button. And here it is in a nutshell. I'm not going to bore you with a long presentation, but let's say you got someone you are concerned about. You can instantly create a new button and roll it out to your 10,000 member employee force in seconds that says, Johnny, that crazy Johnny guy is here. And you could click this icon on your desktop, or you can hit your keyboard like Control F2, or hit our foot pedal. It's optional. And we got pop-up alerts going out. We got text messages going out, and we have emails going out. That could go to coworkers saying, hey, stay out of here. It can go to your manager saying, hey, I need a hand, or most importantly, you can go to your in-house security. They can get a text, they can get an email, they can get a pop-up on their computer because they're playing Solitaire or World of Warcraft. It'll pop up on top of that, and they'll say, hey, Johnny's here, come and do something. I'm going to answer this phone. Thank you so much, everyone. You'll get a copy of the recording soon. Take care now.